My name is Bailey, and I hate your favorite team, and even more than that, I hate your favorite player. Last spring, I made a list, it's behind me right now, of my top 50 players in MLB for 2025, and I made sure that your favorite player on your favorite team was underrated, and that your least favorite player on your least favorite team was overrated. But of course, now that the season is over, I'm sure your favorite player on your favorite team actually had an amazing year. And so you've come to this video where I'm going to review my top 50 to laugh at me and tell me about how I was wrong and tell me my address and tell me my mother's maiden name. Because, of course, you're always right and I'm always wrong. So without further ado, let's review the Foolish 50 for 2025. We kicked off this list with number 50, Jackson Chourio. Admittedly, I was a little bit low on him. You see, MLB Network ranked him at 40 to my 50, but I had a fear, and what I feared was monumental upside. I wouldn't want to make the list and not have the MVP for both leagues, and I was actually just deathly afraid Jackson Chourio was going to take a stratospheric leap forward and win the MVP. Let's see how he actually did. Statistically speaking, this is a similar outcome to his rookie year, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just that maybe you had hoped that he would improve a little bit between his age 20 and age 21 seasons. I didn't necessarily feel like that was guaranteed to happen. You saw some, raw elements of his game, particularly with regards to plate discipline the past couple of years, not walking a ton. You can see that on base percentage at 308. Not the greatest, but he was still an above average hitter, still a 2020 season in terms of the homers and the steals. With his F4 at 2.9, you can see I have sort of a guide here of, okay, here's what an average starter does. That's about 2 WAR. To be in the top 50, you're going to need about 4 WAR. I don't take WAR literally, but, just as a general sort of measuring stick. And you can see he fell short of being a top 50 player by WAR, but of course, then again, he's very young. It's not a bad season at all, but I do feel a little bit better with my rank at 50 than MLB Network at 40. This reaction video will also include fan feedback that is noteworthy. Here's a comment. Jackson Chourio is disgustingly low. Won't even bother with the rest of the video. I won't even bother reacting to that. Number 49, Cole Ragans, the power lefty of the Kansas City Royals rotation. Again, a similar inclusion to Chourio, right? There's upside here. I don't want to leave off a potential AL Cy Young winner. In this case, though, sadly for Cole Ragans, the season did not go as planned. It included a 3-month absence due to a rotator cuff strain. Looking at the numbers here, when he actually did pitch, he was kind of diabolical. I wouldn't let the 4.67 ERA tell the story here. I'm looking at the ratios in terms of the strikeouts and the walks and the homers per 9 inning. Those, of course, feed into FIP, fielding independent pitching, which is the basis for FWAR if you are a pitcher. So he was able to put up 2 FWAR. He was able to put up, the value of a league average starter while only throwing 61 innings. So when he was on there, he was nice with it. I'm not trying to cause any trouble, I'm not trying to cause a racket, but Jarren Duran, you, sir, did not beat the allegations this year because you had an incredible 2024. You had like a 9 WAR season. You were one of the most valuable players in baseball, and MLB Network called like a little bit of BS, like a teaspoon of BS by ranking you 27th. I called a whole heaping spoonful of BS. I ranked you 48th. Here's the thing, if you are a WAR literalist, which I don't support, if you're a big beefy boy who can't field but can absolutely mash, I love you too, but if you are being a WAR literalist, the top 50 threshold cutoff for this year was 3.9 FWAR, and Jarren Duran had 3.9 FWAR, right? And I ranked him 48th. This is arguably the most beautiful ranking in the history of rankings. They're going to give me an award for how beautifully I ranked Jarren Duran and how much I understand him and how prescient and smart I am and how beautiful I look on camera. But you know what? He took 696 plate appearances to get there, 157 games. A lot of it's still kind of based on base running and fielding metrics that, can oscillate a lot. I think you saw that, last year to some extent he had much better defensive metrics, and that was sort of inflating the WAR total. But yeah, that's where we're at with Jarren Duran. I don't necessarily think he's a top 50 player based on the outcome of this season. I'd be a little surprised if he ended up on the list next year, but in terms of just accuracy for this year, I knocked it out of the park. We're actually going to check out a couple of comments from Reddit here. Reddit is the website where instead of asking ChatGPT to solve your problems, you can be like, hey, how do I replace the ear cushions on my headphones? Reddit. You type that into Google. That's how you do it. Sandwich Crust says, Jarren Duran feels low, even if he's probably going to regress from 8.7 Baseball Reference WAR. He did. Still think he's a 5 to 6 WAR guy. He wasn't, at least not this year. Officer Liger concurs. Sure, he may regress a bit, but he was a top 10 player last season. Number 48 assumes a major regression. That's right. I did assume. And you know what happens when you assume? Sometimes it works. Number 47, Carlos Correa started the year in Minnesota, ended it in Houston. You're not allowed to make fun of me. I've decided you're not allowed to make fun of me for this pick because MLB Network had him ranked at 42nd, all right? The big experts up there in Secaucus had him ranked even higher than I did. You know, stop laughing at it being called Secaucus. I promise you, and this is a Bailey guarantee, I promise you that at some point in this list, there are going to be really good players having really good years. This is not the case. This just simply isn't good enough. This is nowhere close to really being a top 50 player, and this is a waste of a top 50 spot. Basically average across the board. I think the defense for him is kind of an interesting question in terms of the value there because he's shifting over to third base with Houston because of Jeremy Pena. He's always had a great arm. I bet he can play a pretty good third base, but he's been a little bit statuesque because of the plantar fasciitis. He actually came to me, he said, hey, I need your feet more than you do. Ooh, ooh. Number 46, Logan Webb, thank you. Thank you. That is how it's done. Logan Webb, I'm going to say thank you in as many languages as I can think of. Thank you. Danke. Gracias. Spasiba. Merci. Ankthe uye. 207 innings pitched. Does it not warm your soul to see a pitcher throwing 200 innings in the big 2025? It warms mine. Oh, it makes me so happy to even think about 621 outs made for Logan Webb. 3.22 ERA to a 2.60 FIP. This was actually sort of a different look, Logan Webb. I think at my absolute favorite, he's running extremely high ground ball rate and just like a respectable strikeout rate. This year, the ground ball rate down for a second year in a row. However, the strikeouts and the swing and miss stuff, this is kind of career best stuff for him. He was recording a lot of like 8, 9, 10 strikeout games, particularly in the first half. That is not the norm, but a lot more swing and miss in his game. And as a result, because of that FIP, which is driven by that strikeout rate, 5.5 F4. I mean, he was absolutely excellent this year. 2.60 FIP over 207 innings pitched. Yes, please. Also, I want you all to clip this, because I'm going to say this because he's kind of a, maybe slightly lower ceiling than some of the usual Cy Young contenders every year. This guy's never going to win a Cy Young award, which is kind of why it's hard to put him on the list every now and then. This guy's never going to win a Cy Young award. But if he does, you can clip this, and then you can put it in the hype video while you show highlights of him winning the Cy Young award. 45, Alex Bregman. Let's review, Red Sox fans. Let's review. You signed this guy, and then he pretty much showed up and said, hey, the franchise guy, the guy you built the franchise around and give the big extension for? Well, actually, I'm a better fit on this team that I've been on for 5 minutes. And then so they trade that guy. And then at the end of this season, which he didn't even play a full season, he opts out. And now you're just like, well, what do I do? And I think it's maybe you just give him hundreds of millions of dollars again. Despite only 114 games played, the opt-out makes sense. He certainly helped his stock more in 2025 compared to his 2024 contract year with the Astros. That year featured some weird career low blips for him in terms of on-base percentage and walk rate. This year, those were both back up, a 360 on-base percentage, very Alex Bregman-y. In fact, this entire slash line is very Alex Bregman-like. And, with 18 homers, with Houston, and I don't say this in a derogatory way at all. I mean, you play in the ballpark that you play in and you use it the way you can. He was accused of being a Crawford boxes merchant when it comes to getting to that, game power overperforming the raw power. And if not the Crawford boxes, I would say the Green Monster is probably the next best thing for him. Do you guys remember the home run derby tiebreaker that eliminated Brent Rooker this year? I would forgive you if you didn't, but they were basically like, yes, the StatCast says that Brent Rooker's longest home run was actually .0159 feet. There's no way it's that accurate. There's no way it's that accurate. They're robbing Brent Rooker. He could have won $1 million. He could have bought the A's. Everything's about perspective, right? We're coming at this from the perspective of I made a top 50 list, and if we see a season that is not a top 50 season, we kind of discard it. And I don't necessarily want to take that for granted, right? 122 WRC plus 30 homers. It's still a good year. Offensively speaking, you know, if he were playing an up-the-middle position with 30 homers and a 122 WRC plus, I think he would find himself on this list and he would be a top 50 player. But just for 2025, for being a DH, not good enough, right? Not good enough. I'm not trying to dog on the guy. You know, I'm not saying you should roll up the newspaper and hit him on the snout. Don't do that to your dog, guys. Don't roll up the newspaper and hit him on the snout or the butt. Number 43, Marcus Semien. Textbook benefit of the doubt pick that did not go my way this time. You know, here's a guy who had been alternating okay and then great, like MVP finalist seasons for the last half decade or so. MLB Network did not fall for this one. They, predicted the fall off a little bit better than I did. They ranked him 62nd. I ranked him 43rd. It's just a very average year, right? It's an 89 WRC plus, which is slightly below average offensively, but also while playing a position that is slightly below average offensively, if that makes sense. It's an average amount of home runs, average amount of stolen bases for an everyday middle infielder, +6 fielding run value. He's still plus there, but I mean, he's had years where he's, more like +10, +15. He didn't even have the Iron Man thing going on that he usually does. 127 games played this year. He usually plays like 161, 162. And the end result is a very average WAR. 2 WAR. It's about the average for a big league everyday player. And that's probably it, right? You look at how old he is. That's probably it. That's probably his last appearance on the Foolish 50, unless I'm missing something here. I will say, though, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. After you, who's last, it's doom. He's the worst known. W ranking for Semien. He's due. That's what I thought too, Vinsky. Love the Semien pick. W for Semien. People were excited about this pick for the most part. We've got, 4 out of 6 here. Pretty positive. They're happy to see him on the list still. And then we've got some other comments here. Semien better than Cano. I don't know about that, young man. Semien defensive merchant. Arguably the best comment here. Manny McAdoo is not how you say Manny Machado's name, although sometimes I wish it was. I will say MLB Network with my last pick there, Semien sort of shoved me in a locker and ate my lunch. Well, this time around, I'm getting a slight win over them. I think I was a little bit less confident in Machado than they were, and that's reflected in the rankings. They're 29 versus my 42. Manny Machado is 33, but he is an old 33, which is almost as old as being a young 36. The reason I say that is Manny Machado made his debut a month after he turned 20 and has a sterling injury reputation. He is kind of an Iron Man if you really look at how many games he plays every single year in and year out. 159 this year. OPS right around 800 in a pitcher-friendly park in San Diego. 123 WRC plus, 27 homers. These are very Manny Machado-y type numbers. The one thing that's not Manny Machado-y, I would say, is the fielding run value at -4. It'll be interesting to see if that is a trend that continues with age because, at his best, this has been, probably one of the best defensive third basemen in the history of the game. Not even just this generation, although this generation is certainly blessed with a lot of great defensive third basemen. It adds up to a season that is right around that top 50 threshold. I think it'll come kind of down to how much I believe in that shift in the defensive metrics and how much I believe in some of the underlying offensive data in terms of whether he can make this list again. But he's had one heck of a career, and I think he's on his way to the Hall of Fame. I guess I tried to do a pump the brakes on the reigning Cy Young winner thing with Chris Sale. It wasn't as much a pump the brakes as, I didn't even rank Robbie Ray or Justin Verlander on this list after they won Cy Young Awards, and I was actually kind of rewarded in doing so. But, Chris Sale was really, really good again in 2025, and I think kind of a freak injury prevented us from acknowledging that. Because these numbers are pretty close to his 2024 Cy Young year. It just so happens he missed, a couple months there. And he missed those months not because of an arm injury, but because while diving to field a ball off the mound, he broke a rib. That's how it happened. But still, I mean, excellent ratio. Some of the best you'll see in terms of strikeouts, walks, and home runs. That adds up to an ERA and FIP in the mid-2s, 3.6 FWAR in only 21 starts. He was awesome, and I know he'll be another year older next year, but I think in some ways with a season like this, he has solidified a continued presence on the Foolish 50. I don't like to make guarantees. Maybe there's a secret underlying stat that I'm going to find out about in a spreadsheet that says he sucks and actually he's worse than Wade LeBlanc. Maybe he's worse than Wade LeBlanc. Probably not, though. I think he's better. Number 40, Wyatt Langford. He was always going to be a bit of a litmus test for me, right? Like, how good is my process for building out a list like this? A list that, mind you, is looking towards the future using data from the past. You know, we're hoping that Wyatt Langford, even though he wasn't a top 50 player in his rookie year, we feel like he could be a top 50 player in his second full season in the big leagues. And I think there's sort of a nuanced way to look at these numbers, and then there's a Bailey way to look at these numbers, because in my heart of hearts, I think this guy's amazing. I think this guy's an amazing player. I think we haven't seen his full talent come to light just yet. I think there's another gear that he could hit in 2026, and I think this was a very good year for him. He had 4 FWAR in 134 games. Great defensive grade, right? +9 fielding run value in the outfield. He did reach that top 50 WAR threshold. This was a guy who was like a fringe top 100 guy for MLB and 40th on my list. And, I think Jackson Chourio is kind of an interesting comparison here because they were both, rookie outfielders last year. Well, MLB Network had Chourio ranked at 40th. I had him at 50th, whereas I had Langford at 40th. They had him at 97th. To be honest with you, and I'm not trying to pick on Chourio, I think Langford was better this year. I mean, the WRC Plus at 118, also a 2020 season, like really good grades defensively. I think this is a very, very good player, and I expect him to be on this list for years to come. And even if you're not fully convinced by his 2025, I think he will be by his 2026. I don't think Adley Rutschman convinced anyone of anything. His career's in a really interesting spot right now. We'll get to that a little bit, but in 2024, he had kind of a disappointing year. MLB Network dropped him from their top 50, and I did not. I kind of gave him this sort of benefit of the doubt pick that we talked about with guys like Semien. I felt like he would bounce back. He had gotten injured, gotten hit on the hand by a foul ball, and that kind of caused some insane first half, second half splits in terms of his offense. But this year, just not good. Adley came into the season as my third-ranked catcher for 2025, and we'll look at honorable mentions at the end of this video, but you'll see that the guys who I would have had ranked at 4th and 5th, even though they weren't on the list, both had way better seasons than this one, so a bit of a misfire on my part here. The 91 WRC+, pretty much everything you see here across the board is a career low for him, and it's an interesting spot because, Basayo is up now for Baltimore. He is not known for his defense as a catcher. Like, he's very much a guy who could contribute a lot with his bat, even just as a first base, DH, maybe a little corner outfield type guy. So that doesn't necessarily spell doom and gloom for Adley's, long-term future as the Orioles catcher. But it does add an interesting wrinkle, especially given the results of the last 2 seasons. Riley Greene, what is this guy's problem? I'm serious. What a weird year. Absolutely inscrutable. Was he good? I mean, he wasn't bad, He won a Silver Slugger. He hit 36 home runs. That should be it, right? He was good. He hit 36 home runs. But the way he did it, man, what is this guy's problem? Because the reason I included him on this list as the #1 left fielder in Major League Baseball is that I felt like he made some nice strides in terms of the strikeouts and walks in 2024 compared to the earlier portions of his career. Well, this year, just throw it all out the window. My goodness, he struck out over 200 times. What am I supposed to do with that? I should be sitting here happy. Hey, 121 WRC plus, that's pretty good. I should be sitting here feeling solid about my pick. But, with the inherent streakiness that comes with a guy who's striking out 200 times a year, with the fact that those are sort of some of the underlying numbers, the contact numbers, the chase numbers that I have to look at going into next year, I have no clue what to do with this guy. I should be sitting here feeling great, and yet I'm just upset. I'm upset and I'm sad. Matt Olson, though, not upset with him whatsoever. Had to drop him from 12 to 37 because he just was not as good in 2024 as he was in 2023 when he was an MVP finalist. But he ended up occupying a tier of first baseman basically all to himself. He wasn't quite in that top tier, the guys we see as we get close to the top 10 on this list, but there wasn't really anyone around him. And I think he did a good job in terms of closing that gap. Another Iron Man year for him, 162 games played, 724 plate appearances. That's going to be helpful when it comes to stats that deal with volume, and WAR is indeed one of those, 4.7, a very impressive total, particularly for a first baseman. That is aided by the fact that StatCast graded him out as a +8 in terms of fielding run value. That essentially is able to, almost neutralize the positional adjustment that comes with playing first base, which, according to the defensive spectrum, is the easiest position to play on the diamond. Matt Olson, of course, plays it very well. And I will say, even as a Braves fan who watched him play every day, when I looked at these offensive numbers and I was filling them out when making these cards, even I was a little impressed. I was like, oh, I don't think I realized he had a 136 WRC plus on the year. Like, that is very, very good. That is 36% better than league average, to be specific. Very nice slash line. I think this is a nice year for Matt Olson. I feel good about, not dropping him too much to the point where I would even, consider not ranking him in the top 50, for example. But, he has a good chance to move up, I think, based on the quality of this season. Number 36, Blake Snell, same ranking as MLB Network, which leaves me thinking, did I copy off the stupid kid in class? That's my mistake. Also my mistake, wrong Dodgers starting pitcher. Just got it wrong. Only made 11 starts this year, some of that bad luck. I felt like he was so good down the stretch for the Giants in 2024 that he was able to opt out of the contract to begin with to join the Dodgers. I thought he was better than he had been in his Cy Young seasons for about half a season, so I believed in him, and it didn't pay off. Maybe I'm being a little harsh on myself. I mean, in 61 innings pitched, it is a 2.35 ERA and 2.69 FIP. Excellent ratios here in terms of strikeouts, walks, and homers across the board. I think this is indicative of where the Dodgers are at with their pitching. To sign a guy like Snell, to have him only start 11 games, they take a very stuff-based approach to their pitching, which inherently means that, there's going to be injuries along the way, right? There's not going to be that many guys in their rotation every year starting 30 games. There might only be one every year, honestly. They're going to do 6-man rotation stuff at times. They're going to use the options on the young guys. And, if you're a guy like Snell and you get hurt, they're going to say, just take your time. Really, just take your time and get ready for the playoffs. And indeed, he was ready for the playoffs, and he was a big part of their World Series run. Trey Turner's ranking was also perfectly in sync with MLB Network, but much to my surprise, this was not a bad pick. He was incredible, actually. He had an amazing season, and I think this might be a case where my process didn't necessarily align with the ranking. This was the one ranking that I got some feedback on that I felt like, okay, I probably should have dropped him down lower just with regards to the age, just with regards to the shortstop defense or lack thereof, just with regards to some of the hitting peripherals, even though those are sort of masked by the speed, but he just proved me wrong and right at the same time. If it sounded like I was waffling back there, I am waffling. I don't even really know what to make of this. He hit 300 again, 125 WRC plus, 15 homers, 36 steals, but the most important maybe, plus 11 fielding run value at shortstop. You don't expect shortstops his age to make, massive strides in terms of defensive metrics like that. And I will say single season defensive metrics, not necessarily the best measurement of a player's value. Measurements of defense are still quite imprecise compared to measurements of offense. That's a theme that'll come up a few more times here probably. And it all added up to a 6.7 F4, meaning he wasn't just, top 35. He was a top 10 player by F4 this year. And when I think about my process and I think about the fact, as we were getting into the spring, maybe I overrated this guy. Maybe he shouldn't have been on the 50 at all. And for him to completely subvert that, I don't know what to make of it. Turner's been one of those guys who, over the years, I've always ranked lower than MLB Network on the list. And I felt like usually I was right in doing so. And yet this time we were perfectly synchronized and he just absolutely crushed it. So I bet next year, I guess I'll move him up, but I probably won't move him up as much as people want me to, and then we'll just kind of see how that plays out in 2026, because I mean, there's some stuff here that you just couldn't have predicted. The comments weren't exactly loving Trey Turner this year either. This one says regression, this one says Trey's not going to be here next year. Spoiler alert, I'm from the future, I think he is. Turner has really bad peripherals, right, in terms of his offense. He does kind of like he overperforms them, but I think, his speed is part of that. That kind of masks some of the stuff that he does offensively. And this one's from Reddit, 84 points, so a pretty popular sentiment 7 months ago, but Trea Turner, not good enough offensively for me to overlook how much worse he's gotten defensively every year, isn't the 35th best player in the league for me, and yet he was really, really good this year. So I'm kind of on this person's side, right? Like, I understood that maybe I betrayed my process a little bit, but if anything, I drastically underrated him based on the results from this year at the very least. Corbin Burns, do you think Diamondbacks fans just sit around and wonder, when are we ever going to sign a veteran pitcher to a nice free agency contract and have it not go absolutely belly up right away? I just feel bad. It's bad luck at this point, I would say. Corbin Burns, had been one of the most consistent starters of the decade, joins the Diamondbacks, and just only a handful of starts before he needed Tommy John surgery. Just couldn't really get it going at all this year. When he does get back, and I don't know what the timeline for that is, I would love to see him, even if it's just come out, have a few multi-inning outings in September or something like that, if that's possible. I think that's the kind of thing that bodes well for 2027 for him. If you can have sort of a normal offseason because you managed to pitch in the big leagues in 2026, I think that would be a good goal. I think the stuff is going to be a topic of discussion no matter what, because even heading into this contract with Arizona, which admittedly at the time when he signed it felt very team-friendly, like I think he kind of came to the team and said, hey, I want to live in Arizona. I like Arizona, simple as that. So I want to pitch here. That's how they ended up kind of cutting a deal with him. But, 2.66 ERA, that's good. 3.94 FIP, maybe not. That's not ace, right? I'm not saying that's bad, but that's not ace. And we saw the strikeout rate kind of declining year over year heading into his free agency. This year, 8.8 strikeouts per 9. I'm curious to see where does his career go from here. The return rate and the success rate for Tommy John is pretty high these days, but I'm curious to see like how that rehab period will go for him in 2026. If you're looking for my thoughts on the Rafael Devers trade, I just didn't like it for anybody. I didn't like it for the Red Sox. I didn't like it for the Giants, and I didn't even like it for Rafael Devers either. He gets traded to a team with a platinum glover at third base. But, in terms of his production this year, the value was very much what it has been in the past, but there was a different shape to it, and I do want to talk about the different shape of his production. First of all, that is kind of a cursed image. That just does not look right to me. That does not sit well within my soul. 163 games played, though. That's a nice little quirk. That's the type of thing that can happen if you do get traded mid-season. I said in the video, the original Foolish 50 video, I look forward to him having an 850 OPS and about 4 WAR. He did have the 850 OPS almost right on the nose. The 4 WAR, it was there in terms of the baseball reference WAR, but in the F WAR, he was 3.3. Again, that is a result of the position change, no longer a third baseman, seemingly now a first baseman / mostly DH type, if we're being honest. 35 bombs. When I talked about the different shape of his production, he was very 3 true outcome-y this year. He struck out more than he ever had, but he also walked a lot more than he ever had. So this isn't quite like a Riley Greene situation where he struck out way more and walked less. So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing to do. But it is going to be interesting to reevaluate his potential ranking on this list, with the knowledge now that he's probably a first base DH for the rest of his career, and with the knowledge that he has more of a 3 true outcome-y approach if last year's an indicator. Number 32, Jacob deGrom. This pick worked. I'm happy with the outcome. The process here was essentially that I trust guys coming off Tommy John more than guys who are sort of, injured, dancing around the question of whether they're ever going to get it. And that's kind of what deGrom had been for the last few years. And the fact that he was able to return to the mound late in 2024, give himself a regular offseason, I think boded well for him in 2025. And he ended up starting 30 games, which is awesome. 30 starts, 172 innings pitched, ERA just under 3. I think that's a top 50 player in the game, even if the F4 threshold isn't quite there for him. Part of that is driven by the FIP, which is driven by the fact that his strikeouts were lower this year than they had been in the past. I think part of that is, especially when you look at the Stuff Plus here, he took a little bit off, right? he didn't quite, pitch at the max effort that he had been in the past. And I think, if it kept him healthy, if it kept him starting 30 games, I'm happy for him. I'm happy for him to keep doing it because he can still take a little something off and be really, really good. He's Jacob deGrom after all. And I'm really curious to see, post TJ here, we're still in what is referred to as the honeymoon period. So you've got yourself like a nice window of, maybe 200, 300, 400 innings where things tend to go really well for a pitcher after Tommy John, and then they might start to, decline a little bit after that. We're still in that honeymoon period. I think we definitely made use of that when doing this ranking compared to MLB Network ranking him at 99th. Woof. My goodness. But yeah, I'm interested to see where he goes from here. He's not getting any younger, but then again, he doesn't have a ton of innings on that arm, and 99th percentile pitching has aged well in today's game. When deGrom was included on this list, he kind of popped up out of nowhere at number 32, not necessarily expected by everyone to be included. There was some surprise, but also some positive sentiments. We got a couple wows, we got a W, we got an oh boy, we got a yes, and then we have, the haters and the losers. Shazad, a hater and a loser. deGrom not even reaching 100 innings. Wrong. Number 31, Matt Chapman. He joined the Giants and immediately had a better year in San Francisco than he ever did in Toronto. And in fact, he liked joining the Giants so much that he left them, opted out, and then joined them again. And curiously on this list, ranked very closely to Rafael Devers. It was an interesting contrast, even without the prior knowledge that they would end up on the same team. You've got, the platinum glove third baseman all-rounder versus the all-bat guy. How do we value those things? The slash line here doesn't look amazing, but you got to keep in mind he plays in a very pitcher-friendly ballpark, and it added up to a 118 WRC+, which is actually pretty close to where it was at in 2024. So not bad offensively at all. I would have liked to have seen his numbers, perhaps over a full complete season. This is a guy who's usually playing, 160 to 162 games per year. This year only 128, so he did deal with some injury concern there. The fielding run value, +4. For him, that has oscillated a little bit because it was, always incredibly high in Oakland. I think maybe the big foul territory has something to do with that. I feel like those corner infielders in Oakland, I guess they're not playing there anymore, but in the past that was kind of a thing. Like Olson too had extremely inflated defensive metrics in Oakland, even though he's still very good defensively at first base. And didn't quite have those in Toronto. And his first year in San Francisco, he was really good in terms of grading out the defense. He looked back to his old, platinum glove winning self. And this year with the +4, that's fine. That's certainly above average, but you do generally expect to see a +8 or a +10 from him. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes going forward. He does kind of need to be one of the best third basemen in the league, or really honestly one of the best third basemen of all time defensively, to maximize his value. With 3.7 WAR and 128 games played, you can kind of prorate him into a top 50 player for sure. But yeah, curious to see especially what happens with those defensive metrics going forward, because they are just finicky year to year. Elly De La Cruz, what did we do with him, right? Top 5 athlete in the game, breakout year in 2024 after being the top prospect in the game in 2023. What do you do with a guy like him? I said, I'm scared. He strikes out too much. I'm scared. I'm just a little baby. I'm scared. Because he did step back some, and I think that was almost to be expected a little bit based on the type of strikeout rates and walk rates he's been running throughout his career. Anyone who does that is going to have some natural inconsistency, maybe not just year to year, but especially month to month. I don't want to downplay what he did either. He played all 162 games at a very demanding position physically. For F4, he's still within that top 50 cutoff. That doesn't guarantee he's a top 50 player. There's a plus-minus margin of error here of at least 1, but it is still that 4 F4 in 162 games. But a step back here in terms of the WRC+, he didn't steal as many bases either, still stole 37, still hit 22 home runs, but ultimately a year that was not quite as good as 2024, and as a result, a ranking that I feel is pretty accurate, even though many felt that I underrated him. You get into the comments from 7 months ago, right? Elliott 30 is laughable. Elliott 30 is wild. 6.5 F4 at age 22, getting ranked 30. That's a new level of underrating Ellie. He's already a top 10 player. And again, this is a ranking for the future, right? Just because you were right around that top 10 WAR threshold in 2024 doesn't mean I think you can necessarily do it in 2025. You've got to look into the future. And to look to the future, you have to look at sort of the underlying metrics. What are the different components of the WAR adding up to that 6.5? Because not all 6.5 F4 seasons are created equal or, as repeatable repeatable as others, especially I think for Ellie with regards to some of the way the defensive metrics graded him in 2024 versus 2025. We can see some evidence of that, but this one's brutal too. Free weekend player. Ellie being only at 30 is borderline rage bait. If you had to bet who would have had the better season, no sane person would take Cal Raleigh. Uh-oh. Ignore the fact that I ranked him 29th. Don't even look at that part of your screen. Look at the top right of your screen. Look at MLB Network's rank. Oh my gosh, guys, what are you doing? You ranked him 59th. Oh my gosh, that's so much lower than 29. You're wrong. Oh no. Ignore the fact that I ranked a catcher ahead of him. Ignore the fact that I didn't have him ranked as the top catcher in the league. Ignore the fact that I ranked him 29th despite the fact that he was at minimum, at the absolute worst, at the most uncharitable interpretation of his historic season, a top 3 player in the game. Ignore that. Ignore the fact that I ranked him 29th. MLB Network, oh my gosh, what are you doing? In the biz, which is what I call business, which is how you know I'm in the biz, this is what we call a relative win, right? Because I ranked him 29th, and he was clearly not the 29th best player in baseball. He was far better than that, so I'm wrong. But compared to MLB Network, I am oh so right. I'm feeling good. I'm not going to lose sleep on that. 60 homers, that is the most homers ever hit as a catcher and by a catcher. And if you think I'm not pedantic enough to know the difference, you do not know Foolish Bailey. Fielding run value +7. He was able to raise that throughout the year. You know, if you somehow combined his 2024 Platinum Glove defensive metrics with this type of offense, he'd be looking at like a 10-plus WAR season. He has to settle for 9.1. And 9.1 F4, I would say he is within the margin of error, you know, the 1 WAR margin of error, 1 to 2, I would say, of his other competitor for AL MVP. I am going to make a prediction here. I'm recording this before the result is announced, but you'll probably see this after the result is announced. I think he won. You know, I think he won. I think the voters bought into a narrative. And even though there's a little contrarian part of me that's like, you could make a very sabermetric argument here because he's close enough in terms of the WAR. And then you look at like the game calling and his, you know, completely nonsensical mound visits according to his pitchers. He probably has other value that can't be measured. But, you know, I think this is your AL MVP regardless. That's my prediction here. And here are the live stream comments from the live premiere of the Foolish 50 at the beginning of the season. Good spot for Big Dumper. W Big Dumper, W pick. Cal W Big Dumper, yes sir. It's safe to say the overall sentiment here is that my audience agreed with me more on Cal Raleigh than say MLB Network. Although I do want MLB Network and all MLB writers to keep this in mind as they vote for AL MVP. Keepo6919 said he was mid. And I think you need to integrate that feedback into your ballot. Corbin Carroll, this guy's a freak. And I don't think I appreciated all the ways this guy is a freak, because I certainly appreciated his base running, right? It's not exactly a new or interesting observation to be like, hey, Corbin Carroll is really fast. But for me this year, the standout trait was the power. My goodness, he has power. He has power to all fields. He has so much bat speed and pop in such a short, compact frame. I don't think I was able to properly appreciate that element of his game until this year. It was a really excellent year for Corbin Carroll. Remember the first half of 2024 when it was like, this guy's cooked. Like, this guy's bad. His shoulder's probably bad. He's going to need surgery. Time to shut him down. Time to ask some, like, long-term questions as far as projecting him. And then he just mashed a bunch of homers in the second half. And then in 2025, he mashed a bunch of homers again. 31 to be precise. And it's really, for me, the underlying power metrics that say, hey, this is very repeatable for him. He has legit pop in that bat. 139 WRC plus, excellent. 32 stolen bases, excellent. +7 fielding run value in the outfield, very encouraging. Adds up to a 6.5 F4. He is within that sort of top 10 cutoff. This was a great year from a great player, and I expect him to move up considerably. Number 27, William Contreras, had him ranked as the #1 catcher in MLB. Of course, that challenger for number 2 was very close, and I'm thinking that challenger for number 2 is going to end up #1 in 2026. I will say for Contreras, though, you know, a guy who had really developed his game defensively since joining Milwaukee to complement what has been a very good bat. His numbers for this year, considering he played through some injury, not bad at all. I was actually somewhat pleasantly surprised when I looked at them. 150 games played, 113 WRC plus, +4 fielding run value, which takes into account his framing and his blocking and his ability to control the run game. All pretty good, right? All, you know, comfortably above average at bare minimum. 3.6 F4, that's just outside the top 50 cutoff, but within the margin of error for such a cutoff. And I think, you know, for him, especially because he was playing a little bit beat up, especially because, you know, they traded for Danny Jansen to give him a little bit of rest, I don't quite know what to make of it. I could see myself almost ranking him similarly next year, just kind of saying, hey, a little bit of a benefit of the doubt to you. Or I could be, in doing so, making the mistake that I did with William Contreras next year that I did with Adley Rutschman this year. And maybe he is just kind of on a downward trajectory and we just don't know it yet. It's going to come down to sort of digging into the, underlying offensive metrics, I would say. One reason I ranked him as the number one catcher, embarrassingly, is that I thought that he had the most offensive upside. That's embarrassing to say, but, it's because he hits the ball hard and on the ground, and he really is one of those guys, like, if you could just get in the air a little bit more, I think he could hit 30 homers, with a different approach in terms of the swing. I don't know if he'll ever get to be that guy, but he is a player I think there are a lot of question marks for going into 2026. Is he still, a top 2 catcher in the game? Or was that just sort of like a nice run and he's going to settle into a more sustainable line of production? With regards to Contreras, we do have it. We do have the ball knower comment. No surprise that Cosmoid is subscribed. You've learned to be a ball knower from the very best. The very best is me. Sorry, but I don't respect any list that doesn't have Big Dumper as the number one catcher. Holy ball knower. Logan Gilbert. This is a case where I think the pick went similarly to the Blake Snell pick, which is to say you come into the year and you say, well, a Dodgers starter is definitely going to be a top 50 pitcher. A Mariners starter is definitely going to be a top 50 pitcher. But which one is it going to be, right? In 2024, I thought it was George Kirby. Maybe wasn't quite right. In 2025, I thought it was going to be Logan Gilbert. Maybe not quite right. The actual correct answer, Bryan Woo. With Mariners pitchers in particular, you do need to keep those home ballpark effects in mind. And I think in this year in particular, there was a lot of discussion about the home road splits for Mariners starting pitching. For Logan Gilbert, a 3.44 ERA, like that is good. I don't want to downplay it, but if he were pitching exclusively in a neutral environment, you might be seeing that ERA creep up into the high threes, for example. Still a lot of upside here. I mean, 25 games started, 131 innings pitched, so he did miss a little bit of time. Most of the Mariners starters missed at least a little bit of time this year. And, in the past, he'd been a 200-inning arm, which I think was kind of why he was included on this list in the first place. 11.9 strikeouts per nine, that's very good. That's a lot of strikeouts. But overall, I think it's safe to say he was not a top 50 player in MLB this year. He was not the best pitcher on the Mariners this year, but he certainly wasn't bad. And I still think he has a nice smile in this picture, so he's got that going for him. Some feedback here from the fans who definitely don't think I'm an idiot and respect me as a creator and respect me as a person. Sad Mariners fan, Gilbert will be the Mariners' 4th best starter this year. Screenshot this, Bailey. I'm right. I did screenshot this. I don't think you're right. I think if you look at the numbers, he was maybe the 2nd or 3rd best starter. But the overall message you're sending here, I'm going to give you partial credit because Woo was better. And then he was sort of in the same tier as like Kirby, who started the year injured, and Luis Castillo, who is like slowly getting 2% worse every year. And then, but he was better than Bryce Miller at the very least. It's the guy with the baseball reference page, Mike Trout. Unfortunately for Mike Trout, who is the best player of a generation, I think it's over. I think that might be about it for him on the Foolish 50. I've always come at, players with, year in, year out injury problems, more so from the perspective of, I'm not going to drop you off the list because you played 40 games. I'm going to drop you off the list when you play a full season and it's still not great. And that's kind of what happened to Trout in 2025. And over the last 5 years or so, I would say everyone has kind of been dropping off Mike Trout at different times. And for me personally, this is the year that did it for me. The 130 games played, the 556 plate appearances, qualifies for the batting title for the first time in a long time. That's good. That should be a positive. But you look at the numbers, it's a 120 WRC plus. I mean, this is a guy we're used to running, like a 160, 170, 180 in those types of metrics. 232 batting average, 359 on base, 439 slug. That is not a Mike Trout looking slash line by any means. And there are times in the past, recent past, I should say, where, he had injury-prone years, but when he was on the field, he was really good, or at least there was, good underlying batted ball stuff where it's okay, he's hitting a lot of home runs, and maybe if the BABIP stabilized, this would still be a Mike Trout-looking slash line. This is not the case here. 1.8 F4, you got to keep in mind, getting moved to a corner outfield, sort of DH type role. He's not going to contribute as much in terms of the defensive value as he did in his prime. He's not going to contribute as much in terms of the base running and the base stealing. Only stole 2 bases this year. This is in his prime, a guy who stole like 49. So I think it's kind of over for him. And he's had an amazing career. He's a Hall of Famer. I can't really say anything bad about him. But it feels like the era of Mike Trout has come to a close with a season like this, a season where he's actually able to play the vast majority of Angels games, and it doesn't really matter because he's just not Mike Trout anymore. Number 24, Garrett Crochet. This feels good. This feels like I learned a lesson. This is the result of a different approach to building out the pitching on this list in 2025 versus 2024. 2024 and in the past, I think I valued past volume too much, like guys who had thrown 200 innings in the past. This year I was like, hey, pitcher injuries happen. I trust a guy that's actually coming off a TJ and had a reasonable workload in 2024, and he explodes with 200 innings and will be a Cy Young runner-up type finish. This is a case where you trust the Tommy John honeymoon period, you trust the pitch data, you trust the upside, and the end result, 32 starts, 205 innings pitched, a whole heaping mess of strikeouts, 2.59 ERA, 2.92 FIP, 5.8 FWAR. He was one of the best pitchers in the league this year. As I alluded to earlier, I expect him to be the Cy Young runner-up in the American League this year. First year in Boston, he has firmly established himself as a top pitcher in the game. And I wasn't exactly going out on a huge limb here because, some of the sharps, some of the, you look at the Vegas odds for Cy Young Award. You look at, how he was getting drafted in the fantasy community. Even though MLB Network did not have him in the top 50, it wasn't necessarily absurd for me to have him ranked as the 4th best starting pitcher in baseball. But nevertheless, it's an outcome that feels good. Happy for Garrett Crochet. Happy for Anna because she had lots of time to crochet with Crochet because of those 205 innings pitched. And the victory lap can continue just a little bit with regards to the comments on the original Foolish 50. This one says, wait, Foolish, did I just see Garrett Crochet as a top 4 pitcher in baseball on this list? Indeed you did, and indeed it was a correct call. This user says, I'm willing to be so wrong. Garrett Crochet will fail. Not only were you willing to be wrong, you were ready and able to be wrong. It is you who failed. Austin Riley, I'm a Braves fan, and I don't really know what to make of this one, to be honest with you. He was an interesting comparison at times to Devers, right? Similar profile in the sense that the bat is more of a carrying tool than the glove. Looks like Riley's going to stick around at third base for the long term. Can't say the same about Devers. But as a result, I have typically rated Riley higher than MLB Network has, and you can see this year it was more of the same, their 33 versus my 23, and I think in this case they got the better of me. Because for a second year in a row, it's not quite a full season. It's a season cut short by injury in the second half. And for the second year in a row, he's not reaching the level of offensive consistency he showed between 2021 and 2023. That 103 WRC plus is basically saying, hey, this guy's about a league average hitter and the fielding run value at -1. That's not necessarily a bad outcome for him, but it's saying, yeah, league average hitter, league average fielder adds up to league average WAR, right? So that's not necessarily a great outcome when you're trying to make a top 50 list. As far as, can he bounce back? Can he still be good? I'm going to be taking a look at the underlying numbers. And I know I've said underlying numbers a few times here, specifically like what is his contact rate? What is his chase rate? What is his barrel rate? What is his bat speed? What is his, pull the ball in the air percentage? These are the kind of things that I tend to look at with regards to underlying hitter metrics. I'm going to have to run those numbers next spring, I guess, because I don't know where I'm going to end up with Austin Riley in 2026. Julio Rodriguez, it's not even frustrating at this point. I think it's just funny, like he does not hit in the first half and then he just goes ballistic in the second half. It's like a metronome, it's just, there's a rhythm to all of his seasons, and this season is absolutely no different. He was great this year, and I think he was able to reverse sort of a negative offensive trend that has dated back to his rookie season, where he was getting a little bit worse with the bat year after year. This year, he's able to turn it around and lead this Mariners team to a division title. I mean, sure, having a 60-homer catcher in the lineup helps, but Julio was no slouch this year. 160 games played, 710 plate appearances, so an everyday player at a physically demanding position, center field. 126 WRC+, plus, again, that is better than last year, and that is the first time we can say that throughout Julio Rodriguez's career. He hit better this year than last year, so that's a great outcome for him. 32 homers, 30 steals, plus 10 fielding run value in the outfield. And that's sort of the thing about Julio. He's big, he's muscular, but he is able to derive a lot of value from playing a plus center field and from the way he runs the bases and from the way he steals bases. That gives him a very nice WAR floor, and is the bat ultimately that unlocks a very nice WAR ceiling. 5.7 F-WAR. I think this is the type of season that gives him a good chance to hop back into the top 20 next year. Number 21, Ronald Acuna Jr. He ended up at 21. I didn't really know where to put him. I still wanted to put him on the list because I knew he was going to play the majority of the year, but if I was rating just based on, perceived on-field value in 2025, I don't think he would have ended up 21. I wanted to show some respect to the player he had been in the past. He was coming off his second ACL tear, and I think if you compare his 2025 to his 2022, which is the time he came off the first ACL tear, this year actually compares quite favorably. 290 average, 417 on base, 518 slug, 161 WRC plus. If you set the filter minimum 400 plate appearances, he was one of the top hitters in the league in 2025. It's the everything else, right? It's the everything else that gives us pause. 9 stolen bases. You can understand them being conservative with him in the run game, coming off, again, that second ACL tear in the second knee, mind you. -8 fielding run value. That is quite poor, especially in a corner outfield spot. And keep in mind, too, his arm is so good that number is even part of it. It would be worse if he didn't have such a great arm. So you got to understand, he's really not looking good as far as the eye test goes on any sort of fly ball. On any sort of ball, he's got to chase into the gap, particularly around the warning track. He is very conservative in the field, and his defensive metrics kind of show it. And so I think going on to the long-term future here, we have concerns about, can he derive any value from his base stealing? Can he derive any value from his defense? Because if he hits like this, he's still going to be one of the better players in the league. But what I fear is that the injuries over time have slowly sapped the dynamism that defined the earlier portions of his career. I just don't know what the profile is. Getting into the top 20 now, it is Ketel Marte, who I ranked as the number 1 second baseman in the league. And I'm very happy to say, for a guy who sort of oscillated throughout his career, for a guy who would have stretches where he was one of the best players in baseball and then kind of back down to average and then one of the best players in baseball again, over the last 2 to 3 seasons, he appears to have reached a level of just really good consistency, and I hope that I can come up with a ranking next year that is more in line with what he has done, because I feel like maybe I underrated him this year, if anything. I will have to take his position on the aging curve and some of his underlying hitting data and even the possibility of a team and ballpark change. His name has been bandied about a little bit in these early trade rumors this offseason. I have to take all those things into account, but I mean, this guy's been really good for the last 2 to 3 years. This year, 126 games played, so not quite a full season, but a 145 WRC plus for a second baseman. That's how you get some of the best value in baseball. You have a player in an up-the-middle position that is one of the better hitters in the league, and that's what Ketel Marte was this year. 28 homers and a -1 fielding run value. That's actually nice for him to be right around league average because he's kind of moved between second base and center field throughout his career. He appears to have settled in at second base, and he is the best second baseman in baseball as a result. Number 19, Fernando Tatis Jr., who was also number 19 on my Foolish 50 in 2024. You'll recall that back in 2023, which was his first full season back from crashing a motorcycle into a pile of steroids, he was an instant success, smash hit in corner outfield, won the Platinum Glove, also won it this year, although I'm not quite sure if it's as deserved. In 2024, he hit well. It wasn't a full season, but the bat started to show up more so than it did in 2023. And this year, I feel like we got a good glimpse of the type of player he really is because the bat showed up to a solid level and the glove was there too. This is almost to a T the exact type of season that I expected for him when I ranked him as 19th on this list. This is it. It's not the type of season that's going to catapult him back into best player in baseball discussions, where, he was legitimately getting up there in 2020 and 2021 before his career setback in 2022. But a 131 WRC plus, 25 homers, 32 steals, +9 fielding run value, adding up to a 6 WAR season. That all feels like very sustainable for me, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think there's maybe still a little bit of frustration in the Padres fan base just because they've seen him do better at a younger age, but I have no complaints. I mean, it was enough to help me win my fantasy league. Zach Wheeler, boy, is this guy good. I think we should probably just start there. Boy, is this guy good. Boy, has this guy been the best pitcher of the 2020s so far. And then I think we can kind of hop into the discussion of the thoracic outlet syndrome and the surgery that he had in August. Hopefully, he'll be ready for opening day in 2026, but there are question marks just because there have been a wide variety of career outcomes for pitchers suffering thoracic outlet syndrome, including basically the end of their career. So hopefully that's not the case for Wheeler, because man, this guy is so good. It was a scary situation for him from a long-term health perspective. It is also a scary situation for any sort of baseball prognosticator because there's just not as many data points and as many good examples of coming back from TOS as there is, say, from Tommy John. But I will say the numbers for this year, up until that point, 24 games started, great ratios in the strikeouts and the walks and the home runs, ERA under 3, FIP right at 3. Like, he's still very clearly, when he's on, one of the best pitchers in the league. Was probably on his way to, being another bridesmaid situation. Never quite the bride in that Cy Young race. But, yeah, I mean, this guy's great. I really only want to just focus on positive things here. This guy's been one of the best pitchers of a generation. Number 17, Jackson Merrill. He was a guy I just talked myself into more and more over the offseason. At first, I was concerned because I just saw sort of like the chase-happy, young, raw outfielder. I saw shades of Michael Harris. I saw shades of Julio. I sort of punished Jackson Chourio for this and not Merrill for this, ultimately because I felt like Merrill had like the contact skills and the end-zone aggression skills to almost have more of a Corey Seager type level of aggression in terms of the swing decisions. And we did see some regression in that regard, and he wasn't quite the player he was in 2024. Really, I think the main difference between his rookie year and his sophomore year is the amount of contact he was making outside the zone. Because even with the chase-happy approach last year, he could still foul off the two-strike chase that he shouldn't have swung at in the first place. This year, you see more of those turning into strikeouts, and as a result, the overall offensive profile is down a little bit. That 116 WRC plus, not as good as last year. It is still encouraging to see the fact that he is a plus center fielder yet again, according to StatCast, with a +5 fielding run value at a position he's only been playing professionally for 2 years now. That is very encouraging. That does sort of raise that WAR floor, which is what we talked about a little bit with Julio. And so even though the season is ultimately a disappointment, right? I think when you rank a player as young as this one in the top 20 who is seemingly ascendant and he puts together a season like this, it is disappointing and it does result in a downgrade. I don't think he's necessarily losing the war of the three Jacksons, though. I mean, I still think he would compare favorably to Chourio's, sophomore year. And then there's Jackson Holiday in the mix as well. Mookie Betts is going to be a really tough player to talk about because even though I'd argue he's had back-to-back regular seasons that are disappointing by his standards, they all have sort of hand-waveable excuses. You can hand-wave away what happened because, 2024 got hit on the hand, 2025 starts the season coming off that stomach bug, lost a lot of weight, scary situation for him. And ultimately, when I ranked him at 16th, that was a ranking determined in late February. So I had already determined that he was going to get a major downgrade compared to MLB Network's ranking of 5th. So even though I was proven right, I don't really know if I'm going to get credit for it. And I know that sounds selfish, and I apologize for how that came off, but I really wish he had just come into this season without the stomach bug thing and could have just played out a normal year and we could draw normal conclusions, because I think the overall results of this, many people are going to feel are inconclusive, and I kind of feel the same way as well. I ultimately downgraded Betts to 16, not because of the stomach bug, because that was not part of the calculus. I made the list, by late February, but because I had already observed declining power in 2024 versus some of his other years with the Dodgers when he was setting, back-to-back career highs in home runs. Bat speed coming down year over year, barrel rate coming down year over year, ability to pull the fly ball in the air coming down year over year. That was what caused me to downgrade him to 16th in the first place, and I just don't really get to know if I was right or not. I was right in terms of the result, but I don't know if the process was ultimately correct or if I just ultimately got lucky and he was about to hit, 40 bombs and play awesome shortstop. Speaking of shortstop, with the weight he did lose because of the illness, you got to keep in mind he's losing weight that was muscle gained during his years with the Dodgers to begin with. He was really kind of getting down to a, Boston Mookie Betts playing weight, and I wonder if that had an effect almost positive on the defense to be a little bit, lighter on his feet trying to play that shortstop, because the +3 fielding run value is actually a very good outcome for him. Imagine if he could hit like the Mookie Betts of the past and be a plus shortstop. He would once again be one of the top players in the league. It wasn't in the cards this year. I don't really know where I'm going to go with him. I'm probably going to end up ranking him lower than the folks at MLB Network do, but he is, I would say, the number one player I'm interested to see, not where I rank him, but I want to see where everyone else comes up on him, and that includes MLB Network, that includes, any other YouTubers who do similar lists. I really want to see where the consensus is going to be on this guy, because I don't know what to make of it. I think I'm probably a little bit negative compared to others. Number 15, Bryce Harper. Did you guys see Dave Dombrowski hit the media, try to light that fire under Bryce Harper a little bit, say, hey, I don't know if we'll ever see the elite MVP Bryce Harper ever again? I respected that move, trying to get him going. He was admittedly like 5% worse than he normally is with the Phillies in 2025. I don't know where that leaves him ranking-wise going into 2026. Statistically speaking, this is, for the most part, a complete normal Bryce Harper type year, which is a very good baseball player. And yet I will point out that the 131 WRC plus, that is the lowest we have seen from him since 2019. Again, if a 131 is the lowest we've seen from you this decade, that means you're a really good baseball player. It just means there are some questions going forward, and I think one of those questions might be something along the lines of, okay, who's ranked higher next year? Bryce Harper or Matt Olson? Or, is Bryce Harper still in that first tier of first baseman? Again, very good player, had a good year. We just don't quite know, what is the ceiling for this version of Bryce Harper. Paul Skenes, he's the Riz King. He rizzed up Livy. He stole her from baby Gronk. I almost don't know what to say about this guy on this channel, just because I spent most of October thinking and talking about him on my main channel, Foolish Baseball. Again, to be very clear, this is not my main channel. For now, at least. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I ranked Paul Skenes as the number one pitcher in the National League, and lo and behold, he is going to win the National League Cy Young Award this year. So that is that part of me that's like, woohoo, I did it. I ranked correctly. Yippee, they can never take this away from me, things said moments before they take something away from me. 1.97 ERA in 187 innings pitched. If you look at Skenes, the start of his career through a historical lens, whether it's through his first 55 career starts or through his first 2 seasons, he's really kind of in a league of his own. He's really battling, guys like Doc Gooden for the best start to a pitching career ever, and that's very exciting. And of course, as I talked about on my main channel, Foolish Baseball, although he presents himself as a power pitcher, he is not necessarily the prototype we have seen in years past. Freddie Freeman, I'm massaging my temples to relieve stress from the thought that he's going to go into the Hall of Fame wearing a Dodger cap. You'll recall that in 2024, he hit about 17 home runs in the World Series on a hobbled ankle. Well, he got surgery on that ankle over the offseason, and when he arrived for spring training, he appeared to be moving worse somehow. He was not moving well at all, and he said, hey, guess what? Despite this, I'm still going to hit 295 with my big chompers. It's a really good year. It's a Freddie Freeman year. It's a Freddie Freeman slash line, apart from maybe the on-base percentage being just a tick lower than we're accustomed to seeing. But, I felt like maybe coming into this season, coming off the highs that he hit, particularly in the 2024 World Series, that he would maybe end up a little bit overrated both on my list and MLB Network's list, which had him ranked at 8th. And I think instead he showed, hey, if you're going to have to drop me a little bit going into 2026, it's just going to be a nice, hot air balloon descent. Not crashing into the ground necessarily. 24 homers, 139 WRC plus. He's Freddie Freeman, He does Freddie Freeman things. Speaking of Freddie Freeman doing Freddie Freeman things, here is Jose Ramirez doing Jose Ramirez things. Jose Ramirez, he is my favorite player in baseball. He looks a little bit like a pug, but he has not let that stop him from being a not just great player, but an extremely well-rounded player year in and year out. It's not just the hitting, it's the defense at third base, it's the base stealing. Of all the Ramirez's, he is the Joseist of them all. And it's not always easy to talk about the fact that on one hand, this guy is my favorite player, and on the other hand, sometimes people feel that I'm underrating him. which seems like something that shouldn't happen to my favorite player. If anything, I should overrate him. This is the second year in a row I've done the Foolish 50, and he's ended up just outside the top 10 rather than just within it. And I think that's an important sort of boundary, psychologically speaking, in people's minds, even though there's not really a difference between the 12th best player and the 9th best player in MLB in any given year. And I will say, in my defense, you're looking at another really well-rounded year. It took him 673 plate appearances to get there, and a lot of boost from the base running, 44 steals, and the fielding run value +6 to get to 6.3 fWAR. We're not being war literalists here, but if I'm saying, hey, he's just outside the top 10 cutoff was 6.4, I'd argue this was essentially the correct ranking. This is kind of where I come down with it is, hey, this guy is the 10th or 12th best player every year in baseball. That's what makes him special. Have some comments here from the Peanut Gallery. Derogatory. Jose Ramirez doing the exact same year for the 80th year in a row. Correct. That is what he does. That's why we all love him so much. He has been basically the same guy year in and year out since about 2017, with one small blip in the first half of 2019, but basically same year every year. That's kind of why he's the man. And then we have Z Green Z1, year 5 in a row of you saying you wish you ranked him higher in the reaction video. Well, here we are in the reaction video, and I'm still not sure I wish I ranked him higher. I mean, inevitably, there are going to be players in the top 10 who had a worse season than he did. So I suppose in that sense I'm wrong. But am I wrong if he really is just the 10th or 12th best player in baseball every year and I rank him 10th or 12th on the list? Is that wrong? Or should I, because of the consistency, rank him, 6th, 7th, or 8th? Because I don't really know what to make of that philosophically. I still haven't fully answered that question. Tarek Skubal, he was my number one pitcher in MLB. He was a lot of people's number one pitcher in MLB. And truth be told, this is a guy who changed the way I rank pitchers, because I feel like in the past, I was too reliant on past volume. Like I needed to see you throw like 180 or 200 innings in a season to end up on this list because I value volume so much. He was, of course, like the best pitcher in the second half in 2023, so a lot of people were in on him. But in 2024, he was not on my list. He ends up winning the Cy Young Award. This year, I change it up. He is on the list, and he wins the Cy Young again. So again, that 2024 season from Skubal really did make me reevaluate the way I rank pitching in 2025, ultimately opening the door for someone like Garrett Crochet, which is appropriate because it now appears that the 2025 AL Cy Young finish will be 1-2 Skubal and Crochet. Again, I'm recording this before it's announced, but I'm just under that assumption. The thing with Skubal is the stuff, and the way the stuff has developed. For him to have a 2.21 ERA and 195 innings pitched, you have to have good stuff. His 116 stuff plus on the Eno Saris model, that is extremely high. You've seen the fastball velocity tick up over and over again throughout the year, so he is just absolutely filthy right now. And as a result, I don't think he's actually that pinpoint with his command in a lot of ways. I know, the 1.5 walks per 9 innings, that is a minuscule, amount of free passes, but he really does operate kind of under a modern, sort of, my fastball is nasty, you can't hit it, I'm going to just try to throw it down the middle, you still can't hit it because I'm just nasty, I've got great stuff. And that is an interesting, sort of comparison and contrast with Skenes, who again I've characterized as more of the finesse pitcher. And I think moving forward, with this sort of Skubal versus Skenes discussion, it's going to be a lot of fun next spring. Like, who is the best pitcher in Major League Baseball? Who should you draft first in fantasy? Like, that is going to be a really fun discussion, down to the fact that their last names both begin with Sk. We're getting into the top 10 here. First of all, it's Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and this is a player I thought we'd be talking about his impending free agency a year ago. Not the case. He signed the big contract extension with the Blue Jays, a team that turned out to be the surprise team in the American League, made a run all the way to the World Series and nearly won the thing. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I feel, had a season that was good. He was really one part of that Blue Jays squad rather than, the sole generator of offense. And as a result, I think because of his heroics in the postseason and how good he was in the postseason, our memory of this season will change from he was good in the regular season to just he was awesome. Because you look at the other first basemen on this list, you look at Harper, you look at Freeman, you look at Olson. Largely a similar season to the one that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just had. These are good numbers, but again, these aren't quite what he's been at his absolute best. And yet, he was so good in the playoffs, and I think the question is, how do you treat that? For me, it's additional data, but I don't think it is data that is more important than regular season data. So for example, here, we have 680 really good plate appearances, right? 680 really good plate appearances in the regular season. In the postseason, he gives us more data. He gives us 90 wow, incredible plate appearances against, the stiffest competition in the league. So, the best pitchers on the best teams. 3.9 F4, not a big F4 literalist, particularly for guys who play way low down on the defensive spectrum, who derive almost all of their WAR from hitting, just because that is more consistent and more precise year to year generally than like the defensive metrics or even the base running metrics. So I'm not saying, oh, this was like a fringe top 50 player, even if he was technically by F4. But yeah, it's interesting with regards to like how do we integrate the data from the postseason to inform our own ranking in 2026? Because again, it's going to be him, it's going to be Harper, it's going to be Freeman, it's going to be Olson, and there's one newcomer I think that is in contention as well for that top first base spot in the league. Number 9, Kyle Tucker. I stuck out my neck for this guy, and I hope he appreciates it because he himself has a very long neck. MLB Network ranked him at 14th. He was so good in half a season in 2024. I thought maybe if he could kind of parlay that into a full season of that quality in 2025, he could get like, Soto money or close to it just because he's, better in terms of the base running and the defense in the corner outfield spot. Wasn't to be, kind of fell off a little bit as the year went along, but still ultimately a solid year for the Cubs. First 3 months of the season, he was awesome, and I thought maybe he was on his way to getting, a $600 million contract. Wasn't quite in the cards in the second half. There was an injury component to that as well. He barely played in September. So ultimately, we're left with a good year, a good enough year to, shore up him being the top free agent going into this offseason. I do think he will beat whatever contract projections there are out there for him, just because he's a good hitter throughout his career and he's well-rounded. You see, the 25 stolen bases. He's played pretty good defense in the outfield throughout his career, but it's not, the top of the line contract necessarily that we've seen in baseball. I don't think he's going to be like a pace setter in that regards where he might have had an outside chance to do so before. But yes, a very good player. I don't think this is necessarily a top 10 season. I think maybe MLB Network got the best of me ranking him around 14th, but I like him, and he does have a very long neck. Really thoughtful viewer feedback from Colin here. The only justification of Kyle Tucker at 9th is that you ate too large lamb and rice pitas with too much tzatziki and spicy mayo, leading to a convulsion fracture upon the right inside elbow. I like this comment because Mediterranean is my favorite cuisine, and it made me hungry. Number 8, Corey Seager. I love him. I'm going to rank him higher than MLB Network every year. You know that. When you see him at 8th and MLB Network at 17th, that's just what it is. This guy is a historically great offensive shortstop. He just is. He's the best offensive shortstop we've seen, apart from maybe like A-Rod and Honus Wagner. That's just what it is. I know he doesn't play 162 every year, but he rakes at the position that is one of the hardest to rake at, and he's not even that bad defensively. You've seen the metrics tick up with Texas, if anything. This guy's special. Love him. Is this a top 10 season this year by on-field value? No, it is not. Is a 138 WRC plus by a shortstop incredible? Yes, it is. That's the thing about him. Look at this slash line. This is a first base bat. This is like a Bryce Harper, Freddie Freeman, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Matt Olson type bat, but in a shortstop. How do I not rank him ahead of those guys? He's a +4 fielding run value shortstop this year. Yeah, he only played 102 games, and yes, he'll probably only play 102 games next year, but I just can't get over this guy. He is absolutely incredible. Number 7, Yordan Alvarez. You can see the 7s all across the screen. 7 last year, 7 according to MLB Network this year. From the outside looking in, this was pretty much a lost season for him, and it was kind of a bad season for the Astros as their playoff streak ended. From the outside looking in, it felt like Houston mismanaged his injury and kind of turned it into a longer affair that it needed to be, and ultimately just did not deliver in 2025. And maybe Houston fans can sound off on this a little bit more. This guy was coming back from a hand injury. He was taking live batting practice, and he was like, hey, this still hurts. And so they give him the x-ray, and they're like, oh, turns out it's broken. And so there's this whole sort of 4-month affair with his hand, not to mention the fact that the bookends of his season, the beginning and the end when he came back, not great numbers by his standards. I mean, this is a guy who can usually sleepwalk to like a close to a 300 average and like a 160 WRC plus, if not 170. Like, he is not maybe the best hitter in the league because there are a couple of guys ahead of him, but he is kind of the purest, like his strikeout rate, he keeps it low, but he's got kind of the insane raw pop. He's just a pure hitter. And it's a shame we didn't get to see it this year. And I really do think the Astros, they take some blame here. And I think we saw a little bit with Tucker last year. Like, he was day-to-day. They called it a shin contusion, and then he ends up missing half the season. So I don't know what the deal with that is. The point is, Yordan Alvarez is very good. He does have an injury history, and I don't really know how to rank someone as pure a hitter as he is if they have that injury history. Number 6, Gunnar Henderson. I thought I was going to get the better of MLB Network with this ranking. They had him at 10th. I had him at 6th, which I felt like was the absolute lowest I could go with Gunnar Henderson based on the quality of his 2024 season, which got a little bit overlooked in terms of just being a really stacked AL MVP race that year. But he really did have an MVP sort of median type season. Like, if you look at the last 10, 15 years of baseball, I felt like this season was like, in terms of on-field value, kind of a median level MVP season, not like a historically great one per se, but the type that can win you one sometimes. And I think in 2025, we saw a bit of a step back. This is a good year, but it's not a top 6 year, and it's not a year befitting someone who is in contention to be the top shortstop in baseball. His 120 WRC plus is more in line with his rookie year than what he showed in 2024. The 30 stolen bases is nice. I will also say the fielding run value is nice as well. Like, at -1, he's essentially a league average shortstop, which is pretty good for him. You'll see that some of the other contenders for best shortstop, are known for their premium gloves at that position. That's not necessarily Gunnar Henderson, so he was always going to need to hit a little bit more than those guys. And this year he didn't. I don't want to downplay how good a player he is, but you saw some regression a little bit from those Orioles stars, not just him, but also Adley. Gunnar Henderson versus Francisco Lindor was one of the toughest decisions I had to make in terms of building out this list, because you have Henderson, who is younger and seemingly has the better bat, at least based on 2024 results, so that would kind of lean advantage him, but Lindor does have the premium glove at that position and a longer track record of success. Ended up going with Lindor, which isn't always in line with how I would do the process for this, but I was rewarded. Lindor was better both with the bat and the glove in 2025. The +3 StatCast fielding run value, if anything, is a little bit low for him, and we never know, does that mean he was actually worse defensively than he has been in years past, or is that just sort of a single season defensive metrics blip? Those things tend to fluctuate throughout a player's career. You kind of have to look at them in like 2 or 3 year sample sizes, but if he had managed, a +10, we're looking at like a 7 WAR season from Francisco Lindor, and +10, a very possible outcome for him in any given year, considering the quality of his glove. Offensively, he just continues to be really consistent with the Mets these last few years. He's just 6 WAR every year, it seems like, 732 plate appearances. So again, relying on that volume to get there, but a 129 WRC plus as a shortstop, 30-30 season, 31 each of the homers and the stolen bases. I'm quite proud to say that I ranked this guy as a top 5 player in MLB. I don't know if he'll be there next year, but I'm perfectly happy with the outcome for 2025. Backpacking off that Lindor versus other shortstops discussion, here's a comment from 7 months ago. Lindor above Seager, Gunnar, and Betts is wild. Not even close offensively. Ellie may even be more valuable by year's end. Beer-battered onion rings, you do not know ball. However, your name does make me hungry as well. Dare I say hungy. Number 4, Juan Soto. From this point onward, I have the same top 4 as MLB Network, so no need to discuss that element the rest of the way. Juan Soto, he joins the Mets, goes cross town, gets the big record-setting contract, and he has a Juan Soto type year with one fun exception, which we'll look at when the stats come up, but it's a Juan Soto type year. I think in terms of pure on-field value, he might have a hard time delivering on this contract just because he doesn't have much to offer defensively. Like, you look at this guy and you think this is a long-term DH, and he doesn't pitch like the other guy who got a $700 million contract, but he is a generational hitter. He is going to be a Hall of Famer. He is Juan Soto, and I think he is about the fourth best player in baseball. When it comes to WAR and some of the discussions we've had in this video about the nuances of WAR, I think Soto and Lindor are prime examples, the two teammates for the Mets. You know, because Soto had less WAR than Lindor, that doesn't mean I don't think Soto is a better player or a more valuable player or the player that I would rather have on my team because A, he's within that sort of, 1 to 2 WAR buffer zone, that margin of error. And second of all, he's deriving his WAR almost exclusively from his bat, with the exception of the stolen bases. The 38 stolen bases, that is a career outlier for him. Interesting to see if that can continue without Antoine Richardson as the Mets first base coach. But you see that on base percentage, right around 400, that WRC plus 156. He's a better hitter than Lindor, which means he sources his WAR from less dubious places. Lindor sources his from defensive metrics, which are more imprecise than measures of offense, and from, positional adjustment of being a corner outfielder versus a shortstop. So some nuances of WAR there, but suffice to say, Juan Soto, good player, perfectly fine start to his career in Queens. Let's see if it can get a little bit better. Number 3, Bobby Witt Jr. I think after this recording is over, I'm going to open up a Word document. I'm going to title it 2026 Foolish 50. I'm going to write down the numbers 1 through 50. And then at number 3, I'm going to write Bobby Witt Jr. and hit save and not look at it again until February. Because that is what he is. He is the third best player in baseball. He secured that at minimum this year. He was excellent again. And yes, the bat wasn't quite where it was in 2024, so maybe he's not so different from, say, Gunnar Henderson in that regard, but it's the plus 20 fielding run value at shortstop. Ever since his rookie year where he really struggled to make the routine plays more than anything, he has been graded out as one of the absolute most valuable defenders in the game, an elite defender at a position of great value. And because of that value, he puts together an 8-WAR season with a 130 WRC+. When you put together an 8-WAR season at a young age for the second time, last year he was like a 10-WAR player, and you make it feel sustainable this time. You are securing yourself as one of the best players in MLB. The other thing here I want to point out, the 38 stolen bases, those aren't the most bases he's ever stolen in this season, but I do think it's the most efficient way he's stolen bases in a season, so that's encouraging because he's been a guy, he's so fast, but sometimes you scratch your head a little bit at the amount of caught stealings. This year, much more respectable at only 9. If you want to, I can probably just pull up some of the older footage I have of me talking about Aaron Judge coming off a historically great season, maybe the best season a right-handed hitter has had, maybe the best season any hitter has had since Barry Bonds. It happened again, right? He's still riding that wave that sort of began when he broke the AL home run record a few years ago. He is still Aaron Judge. Here's another 10-WAR season. Here's another, WRC plus over 200. Why not? Is this the best player in baseball? It's a toss-up for me, and it's such a toss-up that I'm almost not going to make it a discussion here as we get to him at number 2, and then you know who at number 1. But man, just another incredible year, 331 average, 204 WRC+, 53 homers. Like, that's kind of insane. You forget because Big Dumper hit 60 that he also hit 53, and he also went through like some sort of injury stuff, and he had some DH days he had to play through. Still a +5 in terms of the fielding run value, still a 10-WAR season despite, again, those DH days, which tend to bring you down in terms of WAR, if anything. And yeah, the average this year, I guess, was the statistical highlight, just because that was, the best he's put up throughout his career and probably higher than even his biggest believers could have expected. He is on just an insane historical run right now, and I almost feel like comparing him to someone who is going about his historical run so differently kind of does a disservice to both of them. So hats off to you, Aaron Judge. You will be in contention for number 1. Don't really know where I'm leaning, and don't really want to make that the focus. The point is he was awesome this year, and I kind of hope he wins MVP, even though I don't think he will, and even though I think you can make a sabermetric argument for both. I just feel like maybe voters will be sort of enraptured by the narrative here. There's not as much of a narrative with Aaron Judge because it's like, oh yeah, I've seen him do this before. And then here's number 1, it's Shohei Ohtani. MLB Network reached the same conclusion. I ranked him as 9th in 2024, which I think was kind of sound decision-making, except for the fact that it was Shohei Ohtani. So as a DH only, he won MVP. And then this year you saw a return back to him as a two-way player. He didn't quite get in as many innings as I would have previously hoped. Like, this could have been a better season, if he had managed to, start pitching a little bit earlier or maybe go deeper into some of his starts. They were being very careful managing him. But yeah, I mean, the guy freaking hits and he freaking pitches. What else do you want me to freaking say? So here's the hitting stats. First, Shohei Ohtani is the only player who gets 2 cards on this screen. 727 plate appearances, 172 WRC plus, slightly lower than what we've seen, based on like how he hit in 2023 and 2024. But I think still the highest WRC plus by a qualified hitter in the National League. 55 homers, so another 50 homer season for him. Did not have the steals this year, right? 20 stolen bases last year. He stole 50. He had the 50-50. It was a whole thing. Remember that game against the Marlins, blah, blah, blah. But still, 7.5 FWAR as a DH. This total does not include his pitching stats. There's no fielding run value to speak of here because, he's a DH, except for when he's pitching. So let's talk about when he's pitching. Because when he's pitching, he's really good too. He's going to grab another 1.9 FWAR off of that. There is a little bit of an ERA FIP discrepancy here, and I think I'll say about FIP is that it is more predictive of future ERA than past ERA, and I'm not surprised that his FIP was so low because his stuff was just so nasty, and I think one thing that played up with his stuff was just, only making 14 appearances, only throwing like 3 to 4 innings per appearance. He kind of built that up throughout the season. I have some sympathy for the Dodgers because it's not like a regular pitcher where you can send him out and do like rehab assignments for a month. You can't send him down to the minors because he's too busy being the best hitter in the National League, so you kind of have to work with that. But yeah, and I think the stuff plus and location plus are telling here too, just because from my own eye test, like, his stuff was electric because, again, he's kind of got, shorter outings this year compared to, say, when he was pitching with the Angels. And location plus, it's like, yeah, he's just letting it loose. Like, he's not really locating all that great, some of his outings, but he's just so nasty. And then, you've got the 1.9 FWAR, which is derived from that very low sub-2 FIP. Going forward, I think the question is, like, how many starts can we get from this guy? How many innings? Because I think that is going to be ultimately what determines whether he is the number 1 best player in Major League Baseball or not, because he has some serious competition. It is now time for honorable mentions. I've collected quite a few this year. Honorable mentions are a mix of players who are just outside of the top 50 for me, players who were on the bubble and just didn't quite get in this year, as well as players who were not under heavy consideration for the list, but had good or noteworthy seasons. We're going to start with the unofficial number 51 on this list, Alejandro Kirk of the Blue Jays. Had a very good year. I liked his sort of youth and his fielding prowess and the fact that in the past he had been a Silver Slugger winner, and the bat did bounce back this year compared to where it had been at between 2023 and 2024. The Blue Jays hitters as a whole did extremely well as a collective, and he was certainly part of that. 116 WRC plus is excellent for a catcher. And the other thing here is the plus 22 fielding run value. With a fielding run value like that, a lot of it is driven by framing. That is certainly Kirk's strength as a catcher, and it'll be interesting to see how that interacts with the automatic ball challenge system coming to MLB next year, which he actually showed a prowess for in spring training. He was very good at, getting the correct calls. He seems to really understand the strike zone from a catcher's perspective. It adds up to 4.7 FWAR, which is within that top 50 FWAR threshold. An excellent year, and although I don't make any guarantees really, because I kind of start fresh with the list every year, the fact that he was very close to making the list and then had a season as good as this one bodes well for his inclusion in 2026. And this is the next guy who didn't make the list. This is the unofficial number 52. It would be Christian Walker. Moving from Arizona to Houston over the offseason, they were hoping to avoid some of the pitfalls that they ran into when they signed Jose Abreu, another older first baseman. Although this wasn't as bad as Abreu was in Houston, this was not a top 50 year. And unlike Kirk, I would say this is not the type of year that bodes well for his inclusion on the list for 2026 or really ever in the future, considering his age. So that's a bummer. The 99 WRC plus, that is a league average hitter, but that is not a league average hitter for an everyday first baseman. Everyday first basemen are expected to hit more than that, and he did not. 27 homers, not bad. You know, I felt like with Arizona, he was almost unlucky. I felt like his batted ball quality was so good, particularly in 2024 when he was like a 120 WRC plus guy. I thought maybe he was like a true talent, 125, 130 guy. Wasn't the case this year. Fielding run value +2. It's above average, right? But he is one of the best defensive first basemen in the league. In fact, in many ways, I feel like his defense at first base in the past was the most game-changing defense at first base in the league. It all adds up to a 1 F4 season. It is not a top 50 season, but I am acknowledging that I was quite close to getting Christian Walker on this list. Here's a guy that did have a top 50 season, though, and that is Kyle Schwarber. He is still a bubble player, but admittedly, he was not, you know, in the final 51 or the final 52. He was just kind of outside of that. But the 152 WRC plus, the 56 homers, he has continued to improve offensively year over year the past couple of seasons. The batting average has come up to a 240, which for him, if he's hitting 240, he's going to be one of the best hitters in the league. That's just kind of how he profiles. Really impressed with him, really impressed with how he's developed as a player, really ever since he got non-tendered by the Cubs in 2020. 4.9 F4 on the season, although this is never a guy who's going to have a particularly high WAR, because when he plays defense, it's bad, so he usually DHs. 4.9 is pretty incredible off the strength of the bat alone. He is a player I would expect to see included on the list going into next year. And then still in this lane of players that were on the bubble, on the cusp of making this list, Michael Harris II. Once again, I can say I'm kind of happy for my sake that he was not included because this was not a top 50 season. You can see the 268 on base percentage compared to the 249 average. There's a story there, right? There's a story of a guy who doesn't really walk, who is very see ball, hit ball. It is a 2020 year, right? It's 20 homers, 20 steals. It's also +7 fielding run value in the outfield, center field to be specific. So there is a lot of potential and upside to a Michael Harris season in any given year, but it was not there for him. 83 WRC plus. The thing is, he was so bad for most of the year. He even had an incredible stretch following the All-Star break. So he had like a nice prolonged run of success, and yet the season WRC plus only 83, and that adds up to a 1.4 F4, not a top 50 season. And Harris has been around the bubble of this list before. I don't imagine he'll be around the bubble going into 2026. Now, a player who was considered and will probably be back in that consideration towards the back end of the 50 again is Willy Adames, who joined the Giants from the Brewers over the offseason. He had an interesting year. He broke the curse. I guess we should start with that. He hit 30 home runs. He became the first Giants hitter to hit 30 home runs in a season since Barry Bonds. That was a very long, ongoing thing that was very funny to follow over the last 20 years or so. WRC plus 108. It's a little bit lower than some of the better seasons he's had. The batting average is quite low at 225, but overall, it's not a terrible offensive season for a guy who has a pretty good reputation with the glove at shortstop. We should hit on that as well, because he finished with a +4 fielding run value, which is curious because first couple months of the season, his defensive metrics were actually grading him out terribly, so he actually had to turn that around quite a bit to finish with a +4. He ends right at 4 F4, which is right around that top 50 cutoff. He actually was on MLB Network's list. We'll get to some of the differences between my list and MLB Network's list at the very end of this video. But yeah, I think this is another player who, if he's not in the top 50, he is sort of fringy, like top 60, top 70 player in baseball potentially. Next honorable mention is your World Series MVP, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. He was considered for this list. I ended up ranking 11 starting pitchers on the list this year. That is not including Ohtani. Yamamoto was, for me, essentially SP13. He was the 13th best option, so he was sort of the second pitcher left off in order. And he delivered an incredibly strong regular season, and of course the postseason heroics will be something we talk about for a long time. But it's a great regular season as well. He was a Cy Young finalist. It's a 2.49 ERA. He was sort of the rock of the Dodgers rotation, which had a lot of injuries, a lot of different guys starting games. He was always in the mix, and he was always great. And he, was considered on the list off the strength of a pretty good half a season that he had in 2024, as well as a good playoffs, as well as, of course, the many Sawamura awards he won over in MPB before he came over to join the Dodgers. He will most likely be on this list next year, is my guess. And then the final honorable mention who was heavily considered for this list is Gerrit Cole. He was the last pitcher left off this list, if that makes sense. He did not record any stats this year. You'll recall that he underwent Tommy John surgery in the spring, but I finalized the list on February 26th, so I had already made the determination he would not be on the Foolish 50 this year heading into the 2025 season. So I am still including him here because I did have him technically ahead of Yamamoto, but otherwise it was Yamamoto and Cole who were the two pitchers heavily considered to make the list that did not make it. But now we have a different sort of pitcher, a pitcher who was not heavily considered to make the list and then absolutely delivered a top 50 season. In fact, if you go off F4, a top 10 season for Cristopher Sanchez. I've been a fan of his for some time. I don't want to act like, I completely underrated or overlooked him. I was a big fan of his, really following his 2023 half season. He had a very strong half season with the Phillies, and he's turned that into a really good 2024 and an even better 2025, which just saw him finish as the runner-up in the NL Cy Young Award to Paul Skenes. He has a really interesting sort of developmental path. I think you got to credit the Phillies for that. They traded Curtis Mead for him, and for a long time it looked like Mead was going to be, kind of the star prospect of that trade. Sanchez always had really good stuff, but just couldn't really locate, would walk a lot of guys. And then all of a sudden, really 9 years into his professional career, he just decided, I'm not going to walk that many guys, and he's been a really good pitcher ever since. So that's how you get to 200 innings of 2.5 ERA ball. He was excellent this year and will be heavily considered to join the list next year. And we do have a Cristopher Sanchez ball knower moment from Little Bit of Yeah. Cristopher Sanchez is about to have a season that makes you include him next year. Safe to say that is essentially what happened. And then the last Cy Young finalist, the one we haven't talked about yet, is Hunter Brown of the Houston Astros, who had an excellent year as well. 185 innings pitched, 2.43 ERA. I will point out there is a overperformance of the ERA compared to the FIP. His FIP was 3.14, and I will say going forward, I would maybe be more inclined to look at the FIP more so than the ERA, just because, as we know, past FIP is a better indicator of future ERA than past ERA is. I will also say, of all the Cy Young finalists, there's 6 of them, 3 from each league, he's probably just at first glance the least likely to end up on the list in 2026, but that's saying first glance, right? He's going to earn himself a deeper dive, and who knows what I'll find. Geraldo Perdomo is the next honorable mention who was not heavily considered to make this list last spring. Wow. What a season for Perdomo. I've always been a fan of his game. I was a fan of him as a prospect. He had kind of this reputation as a light hitting but patient hitter. It's a combination that doesn't always work in MLB. Sometimes it does much better in minor league baseball than major league baseball because, you have kind of a passive guy up at the plate. In the majors, if they're not afraid of the power, they're just going to pepper the strike zone against you, so you can't, get your walk rate up as high as you normally would, even if you have a very strong understanding of the strike zone itself. Anyways, Perdomo this year, with the 20 homers and the 138 WRC plus, has added some power, added some pop to his game, and that has made all the difference because he had a phenomenal season. He has the skills otherwise, right? The 27 stolen bases, plus defense at shortstop. Again, the walk rate, you can see 290 average versus 389 on base. That is incredible. But to add the power is what really has unlocked this type of season for him. This is a top 5 season by WAR in the game in the year 2025. That is incredible for him. Moving forward, I think it's just a question of how much do I believe in the 20 homer power? How much do I believe, in his ability to get to a 138 WRC plus, or at least, within the same ballpark? Are we going to call BS on this, next spring a little bit the same way we called BS on Jarren Duran, or are we going to go full steam ahead? Because if we go full steam ahead, I mean, he's one of the best shortstops in the game in that case, right? He's gonna. This is a season very comparable to the one that Francisco Lindor just had, for example. And then again, in the same zone of I have no clue what to do with you in 2026, it is Pete Crow Armstrong. It was a tale of two halves for him, and I will say coming into the season, I didn't think he would hit. I didn't think Pete Crow Armstrong would ever really hit in the big leagues. I thought maybe this was going to be a Kevin Kiermaier type career, right? That's still an incredibly good player. Kiermaier had a very good career, but he was not really known for the bat. Well, this was a great offensive season for Pete Crow Armstrong, particularly in the first half, but in the second half, he did fall off quite a bit. in a way that sort of matched my initial projection of him. So I don't really know what to make of this overall season stat line. I mean, it's a 30-30 season with plus 21 fielding run value. He is tooled out the wazoo. He is a white boy that can get a little bit sensitive with it at times, and that's one thing we like about him. But at the same time, I don't know what to make of like the chase rate. He's going to be reliant on just being able to pull that ball in the air when he does hit it and, just hit home runs at a high rate, because I don't think, he's ever going to walk a lot. For example, a 287 on base percentage, like that feels kind of gross to put on the foolish 50. I see some of the pitfalls that, Michael Harris has encountered throughout his career, also in Pete Crow Armstrong, even if that batted ball distribution is far better than Harris's. Just the fact that they don't walk and they chase a ton, there's going to be some volatility there. Still, it's 5.4 F4 on the year. That is comfortably a top 50 player. But yeah, where do you put a guy like this on the list next year? I have no clue. And then on the flip side, here is a bat that is insanely legit, but maybe without the tools to contribute as much in terms of the fielding or the base running. It is the Big Amish. It is Nick Kurtz, the Rookie of the Year in the American League for this year. 36 home runs in 117 games. That's outrageous. This season reminds me a lot of Yordan Alvarez's rookie season, 2019. That's because he just started the season absolutely destroying AAA and then came up and then sort of hit at this rate. 290 average, 383 on base, 619 slug, a 170 WRC plus. Although he didn't quite qualify for the batting title, he was one of the best hitters in the league this year. I think he is in contention to be the top first baseman in the game. Even compare him to a guy like Vladdy or Harper or Freeman or Olson. Like, I think with a season like this, he's already up there in those discussions potentially. The one thing that maybe scares me a little bit is the strikeout rate, which was up around 30% this year. So there could be volatility there, but he also walked a fair bit, right? And so that adds some consistency as well. 4.6 F4. This is not a profile where F4 is going to be our chief concern, but even then, in 117 games, he did still manage to hit that top 50 threshold. Will Smith was considered for this list, although I have him kind of in this area of the honorable mentions because Alejandro Kirk was ahead of him. So, Alejandro Kirk being the unofficial fourth best catcher for me, that made kind of Will Smith the unofficial fifth best catcher for me. He had a monster year offensively, particularly in the first half, a 153 WRC plus in 110 games. So in the second half there, he did miss some time, but still, a 153 WRC plus as a catcher, -8 fielding run value. That is not a strength for him. He is sort of fluctuated at times between closer to a league average catcher versus a fringy defensive. I don't know how much longer this guy can play catcher type of catcher. I wonder, and this is basically speculating at the moment, I wonder if Dalton Rushing is that guy, right? And we don't know that yet. If Dalton Rushing is that dude, if Will Smith would consider, playing at least a little bit of part-time third base or something like that. I think that'd be interesting to see that he has that background within his, professional development. For F4, again, in only 110 games, that's very impressive, especially with the StatCast fielding metrics not smiling upon him. And of course, he was the World Series hero this year. And the comments did call it out. Will Smith revenge tour incoming. I think he did get his revenge after all. Will Smith will prove you wrong, best catcher in baseball. Although he is not the best catcher in baseball, it was still a very impressive season. And then we have our final honorable mention. Steven Kwan was considered for this list, though I did have guys like Harris and Schwarber ahead of him, and they didn't make the list either. Here's Steven Kwan, had a really nice 2024 offensively, and that prompted a lot of people, as we'll see, to want his inclusion in the Foolish 50 for 2025. Didn't happen, and I think looking at these stats, it's a perfectly fine outcome for me. He was essentially a league average hitter, that 99 WRC plus, where 100 is average. That's saying he's a league average hitter, stole 21 bases, 11 homers, plus 12 fielding run value. His chops in the outfield are well documented. He is a perennial Gold Glove winner in left field, adds up to 3 F4. That is outside the cutoff. Not much upside here to speak of. I think it's perfectly fine that Steven Kwan did not make this list, even though he is truly one of my favorite players. The reason I made Steven Kwan my 14th and final honorable mention is that going back and looking at the comments, he was the player by far most cited as a snub on this list last spring. There have been times where I knew who that was going to be. There was one year I left off Bo Bichette, and I just knew that was going to be the guy who everyone is commenting about and saying, hey, why'd you leave this guy off the list? You don't know baseball. You're stupid. Your glasses are stupid. comments like that. So this year it was Steven Kwan, which surprised me a little bit, but I didn't really anticipate who that player was going to be. Alex says, you will regret leaving Kwan off. Come back to this comment in November when you react to the list. It is now November. I am reacting to the list. I'm coming back to this comment. I do not regret it. This one says, no, Kwan is pretty crazy. It has 64 thumbs up. Yeah, Kwan is a top 50 player. I don't think so in this case. You missed Steven Kwan. Didn't miss him this year. I mean, he's a good player who had a good year, but I just don't really think it was of top 50 quality. I think you're starting to underrate Steven Kwan. He has a really high floor and has shown glimpses of a higher ceiling in 2024. Indeed, he did. In 2024, had a little more pop in the bat, hit more homers than usual, but that was not to be in 2025. So now we're on to the part where I very quickly and somewhat haphazardly grade my list versus MLB Network's list. This is split into two categories. The first is disagreements. These are players who were both ranked within our top 50, but the ranking spot was different. And the way that I determined that it was a significant enough difference to count as a disagreement, that gap changes depending on the placement on the list. So for example, my Gunnar Henderson was at 6, there was at 10. I determined that that was statistically significant. I wouldn't say the same about if, I ranked a player at 44 and they ranked that player at 48, even though that is the same 4-spot difference. The amount of spots needed to be statistically significant as you get further back into the list. So there is a color coding going on here, and I'll try to, sort of apologize to the red-green colorblind among you. But essentially, the ones that are green here are cases where I'm going to give myself the credit, and I'm going to say that I gave a better ranking for this player than MLB Network. So in this case, Duran, I liked my 48 better than their 27. Manny Machado liked my 42 better than their 29. Corbin Burns liked my 34 more than their 25. Rafael Devers, I liked my 33 more than their 21. Mookie Betts, I liked their 16 more than their 5. And Freddie Freeman, I liked my 13 more than their 8. Some of this is up to just, my own interpretation. I try to grade fair. I try to grade a little bit harsh, if anything. You'll see that with the way I give credit to MLB Network when I think credit is due. The players in red are where I'm giving credit to MLB Network. So I like their 20 for Chris Sale more than my 41. I know Chris Sale didn't pitch the full season, but when he pitched the full season, I think you could make the argument he was a top 20 player in baseball. He was so good coming off that Cy Young season. Mike Trout, their 39 is better than my 25. Austin Riley, their 33 is better than my 23. Jackson Merrill, their 24 was better than my 17. Kyle Tucker was kind of a tough one to pick, but ultimately I feel like their 14 was more reflective of on-field value than my ranking at 9. And then finally with Gunnar, I think their ranking at 10 was better than my ranking at 6. The one player who has been marked in the yellow, who I couldn't really decide between whether I liked my ranking more or MLB Network's ranking more, is Corey Seager. It gets kind of up in the air because, once again, he did not play a full season, but also he rakes for a shortstop and he plays all right defense, according to StatCast. I just felt like maybe right between 8 and 17 was the correct answer for him, so no credit was given to either side in terms of that ranking. The end result here is 0, right? All these cancel each other out. There are as many green names as there are red names on this list, so nobody's really getting an advantage over one another based simply on the disagreements within the top 50 itself. That means it's time to move on to the next category, which is inclusions within the top 50, unique inclusions. So if I ranked a player within my top 50 that MLB Network didn't, we will be grading their potential to be a top 50 player in 2025. So here you go. Here are the unique inclusions. These are players that were on my list and off their list and vice versa. Marcus Semien, White, Langford, Adley Rutschman, Riley Greene, Jacob deGrom, Cal Raleigh, Logan Gilbert, Garrett Crochet. Those were my unique inclusions. For MLB Network, it was Pete Alonso, Christian Walker, Marcell Ozuna, Framber Valdez, Max Fried, Willy Adames, Jose Altuve, and Garrett Cole. This question we're asking ourselves here is simply, could you make the argument that this player had a top 50 season? You could make that argument for more than 50 players in any given year. If I had to guess, you could probably make that argument for 70 or 75. So we're going to have kind of a wide range of outcomes here, and I think we're going to try to be inclusive in terms of how you make an argument for a top 50 season. The players now marked in red are players for whom the answer to the question, did you have a top 50 season? Could we make the argument you had a top 50 season? Is no. These players did not have top 50 seasons. For me, that was Marcus Semien, didn't happen. Adley Rutschman, didn't happen. Riley Greene is the closest to like the bubble here because he did hit a lot of home runs and he did win a Silver Slugger, but just the way he did it, I just don't really see the argument for him being a top 50 player in 2025. Maybe someone could make it, but I just don't feel like I could, genuinely. And I'm pretty good with stats, and I'm pretty good with making arguments. I don't know if you knew that. Logan Gilbert, not a top 50 player. For MLB Network, it's a little bit more clear-cut. Christian Walker, not a top 50 player this year, clearly. Marcell Ozuna, clearly. Jose Altuve, clearly. The players now marked in green are players who I think you could make the argument did have a top 50 season after all. And for me, that is Wyatt Langford. Here's how I'd make that argument. He was within the top 50 WAR threshold. He had a 2020 season, blah, blah, blah. Jacob deGrom, 172 innings of sub-3 ERA. That sounds like a top 50 player to me. Got some down-ballot Cy Young votes. Cal Raleigh, no questions asked there. Garrett Crochet, no questions asked there. I almost hesitate to only give myself 1 point for having Cal Raleigh and Garrett Crochet in the top 30 when MLB Network did not have him in their top 50. Here we go. Pete Alonso for MLB Network. I think you could make the argument he raked. Framber Valdez, I think you could make the argument almost any year for him, although he's a little bit more borderline because the ERA was a little bit higher than it normally has been. Max Fried did quite well in terms of the Cy Young voting. I think you could certainly make an argument for him. And then Willy Adames, again, was within that top 50 WAR cutoff. So, again, we're being fairly inclusive here in terms of the ideas of how you can get to a top 50 season. There are quite a few ways to do it. The one player who MLB Network is going to get an exception on, marked in yellow, is Gerrit Cole. They made their list before mine, but Gerrit Cole didn't pitch. He didn't play. I'm not going to penalize him for that, even though I made the determination before the TJ news came out that he was not a top 50 player. And so, believe it or not, after we score all those, the end result is +1 for MLB Network. Hey, that's okay. They're the professionals, they're the experts. They've got their big fancy TV station in Secaucus. They got the best of me this year. This is why I am a lowly YouTuber talking to you right now. And there are two ways to support this lowly YouTuber. The first would be to join the Patreon, patreon.com/foolishbaseball. For $5 a month, you can join, 581 other paid members. You get access to a long ago deleted episode of Baseball Bits about the 2018 World Series. It's not great. I'll level with you. It's not a great episode, but I did delete it. You get access to monthly exclusive video content. This month, November, I did a Q&A. That is something I'll do essentially every other month. And then, every other month, I also do sort of a Foolish Bailey type video exclusively for the Patreon. You can see this one is over an hour long. There's quite a few Q&As, so there's just hours and hours of content there. It's just me answering questions, essentially. But you can see, some of the topics I was asked about in this month's Q&A. That is something I do. And this month... So, for the November collecting period, people that will be charged actually on December 1st if you join today, this month, I will be donating all Patreon earnings to charity. And that's something that I've done every December for the last, 4 or 5 years, ever since I've done the Patreon. So if you join and you pledge, once it charges you on December 1st, that money will be collected and actually given to charity. So feel free to join the Patreon at patreon.com/foolishbaseball. And the other way would be buying tickets off SeatGeek and using code FOOLISH at checkout. If you do that, you will get $20 off your first order. And hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you had, say, a new email and a new credit card, maybe you could make a new account and then have another order be your first order. Keep in mind, baseball season is over, but you can do this for basketball, football, any sporting event, live music, comedy, any sort of event that they're going to sell tickets for. You can probably get it off SeatGeek, and you can use code FOOLISH at checkout to get $20 off and help support what I do.